Okay, so how worms move. So they have longitudinal and circular muscles that work together. And so the circular muscles actually wrap around the body like this way, okay? And then the longitudinal muscles are going to run from head to tail on a worm, okay? And so they will alternately contract the circular and the longitudinal muscles in order to move. Um, in order to be able to contract and extend those muscles, worms will actually rely on what's called a hydrostatic skeleton. And here's the main idea between a hydrostatic skeleton. So a worm, or sorry, if you picture like a bag of water, okay, so um, a Ziploc bag that you go to the sink, you fill up with water, and you zip it closed. Okay, if you were to take that bag of water in your hands and you were to like squeeze it, okay, you would be able to change the shape of that bag of water, but you're not actually going to be able to change the volume or the amount of water that's in there. Okay, so you cannot actually compress water. Okay, it's impossible. All sorts of like um, stuff in like machinery and stuff depends on this property of water, that you cannot actually compress it. Okay, so worms have basically a sac full of water. It's called their coelom. Okay, if you're talking about annelid worms, or their pseudocoelom if you're talking about nematode worms. So they've got their fluid-filled cavity. So when these worms contract their circular muscles around the outside of their body, it squeezes on that fluid of inside of their coelom, and it elongates their body. Okay, so let me draw you a picture. So if this is our worm's body, okay, the circular muscles go around, okay, and when they squeeze these circular muscles, it makes the worm longer and skinnier, okay, because it compresses or squeezes on that water and changes the shape of the water inside of the coelom and elongates the body of the worm. Um, in order for a muscle to re-extend, okay, it has you can't actively stretch a muscle. So like re-extend a muscle. So think of like contracting your bicep. Okay, so when you contract your bicep, that bicep pulls on the lower half of your arm, which pulls it up, and you make like like you're flexing your arm to show off your big biceps. Okay, and so that bicep when it's contracted, and then when you want to relax it, okay, and re-extend your arm, you're not going to simply just be able to sit here and like think about it and like re-extend your bicep and just push it out and stretch and straighten your arm. What happens is, in order to relax or stretch out your bicep again, you have your tricep on the other side, which actually will pull, okay, on the opposite side, pull on the opposite side of your arm and pull on your bone in your lower arm and re-extend your arm. So what happens is you actually have muscles that are in antagonistic pairs, and so when one is contracted, the other is relaxed, and then when you relax one, the other contracts, and it allows for muscles to be re-extended and to go back to their original relaxed state. So worms have antagonistic pairs of muscles as well. Their longitudinal and their circular muscles work in antagonistic pairs. And so when you squeeze on the circular muscles of a worm, when they squeeze, it squeezes on the fluid that's inside of their coelom and elongates their body. Okay? When those circular muscles relax, the way that they get stretched back out in order to allow the worm to return to like its original shape is by the contraction of the longitudinal muscles. So when the longitudinal muscles contract, okay, let's draw it in green. So when these muscles contract, they shorten the worm, okay, back to its original like flat, fatter state, okay? And because again it's pulling on the fluid inside, it squeezes the worm, makes it fatter, which pushes on those circular muscles and re-extends the circular muscles. So then the worm can then contract the circular muscles again and elongate the worm again. So they're able to move by alternately contracting the circular and longitudinal muscles, which allows for the muscles to be re-extended, and they all work against the resistance of that hydrostatic skeleton and the property of water that it is incompressible. Worms also have these things that are called lattices. So they're basically proteins that are wound around the worm. And basically those proteins direct the flow of the fluid in the worm. So they allow for those muscles to be able to contract and direct the flow of fluid so that when those muscles contract, you don't get like bulges or kinks in the worm. So here's a picture actually of the lattices. This is what they would look like. And so they allow for the water to be directed so that the worm stays like in the nice even worm shape, and you don't get like the muscles contracting and a big bulge forming, because that would be counterproductive and could also burst the side of the worm and kill it. So it needs its lattices in order to be able to direct the flow of water. Okay, advantages and disadvantages of a hydrostatic skeleton. The advantages are that it's really resistant to impact damage. So worms don't readily break, buckle, or burst. It's very flexible. Okay, so like distortions aren't harmful. Okay, so you can like take a worm and tie it in a knot and it'll be fine. Okay, so that's fine. But if you were to take like your arm and tie it in a knot, that would be bad. That would be breaking bones. Okay, that would be bad. Your skeleton does not work that way. A hydrostatic skeleton is fine because for a worm because it allows for them to be able to distort themselves and actually fit through places that other things can't fit through, like in the ground and dirt and stuff. Disadvantages of a hydrostatic skeleton: the skeleton does depend on hydration, so worms have to live where there is water. So you find a lot of them in the ocean or damp places. It also requires a lot of muscle in order to be able to move. So, and muscle costs a lot of energy, takes a lot of energy to maintain. So a worm has to have a lot of muscle in order to be able to move. And a hydrostatic skeleton doesn't really allow for a lot of structure, like an upright structure, like humans have. So they are going to be worming away on the floor of on the ground, which means that they're going to have a lot of surface area on the ground, which means there's going to be a lot of friction, so it's going to be harder to move. And it's also harder for a nervous system to completely control precisely the body parts, because it's all dependent on the movement of fluids. So it's much more fluid environment. Okay. The reproductive system, annelid worms are hermaphrodites, like earthworms and leeches. Some annelids are actually going to have separate sexes, but since we're using earthworms as our model marine annelid, that's what we're going to look at. So basically, they have internal fertilization. So you get two hermaphroditic worms that will come together and copulate, and each will pass sperm to the other. And then they will actually store the sperm in the clitellum. So if you ever have seen an earthworm and you see the thing on their body that looks kind of like a band-aid on them, that's their clitellum. That's actually their reproductive organs. That's where they store the sperm. And then they'll fertilize the eggs, and then they actually produce mucus and slide that clitellum off of their body. And the fertilized eggs are inside of that, and it acts as kind of like a cocoon. And the little baby worms develop inside of it. And then once they're fully developed, they will crawl out and hatch into the soil. So the clitellum forms their reproductive organs. Ecology of annelids, they're important for a couple of things. If earthworms are important to the soil, they help to aerate the soil and stuff like that. But this is marine bio, so we're more interested in the ocean. And in the ocean, annelid worms are at the bottom of the food chain. So a lot of times they're filter feeders or suspension feeders or deposit feeders. And so they're going to be working to pass energy up the food chain to higher levels of the food chain. So they start off a lot of the food webs in the ocean. And there's my works cited. Okay, so I would highly suggest that you understand how worms move and include lattices in your description. So please make sure that you understand that. If you need to, email me, message me, and I will hopefully be able to get back to you and help you out. So study hard.